Yo, what is good, YouTube? It's your boy Des Reacts back with another banger of a video. In this one, we got the Black History of the United States of America. I specifically chose this video. This one wasn't requested. I specifically chose it because, you know, most of my subscribers are from the UK, Europe, Australia. I definitely have some from America and all that. But, you know, I just kind of want to give you guys a little insight to why I, you know, value Black history so much. You know, you guys would, you know, be like, Des, why you know, like when I did the slave, when Britain ended the slave trade, link right here, when I reacted to that, there's a bunch of people I was talking about, well, most of the slaves were white, blah 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 blah. And this is why, like, I feel like this is going to show you guys why I speak of, like, you know, correlate it to the black slave trade and all that stuff and racism in America, all that. I never watched this video, but I'm sure it's the history of it. It's going to go back from the start to probably recent times. And, you know, I feel like this would be a really good video for us to watch together. Sorry if this offends anybody or anything, but man, please smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the noties, leave in the comments what you guys would like me to react to. And I have some very, very big news coming soon, and it definitely involves some of your guys' highest requested videos, such as like the greatest raid of all time and some BBC documentaries, all that good stuff. I got a way eventually that we'll be able to watch all of those. And yeah, I'm really excited for this video. This is gonna be, you know, informative for me and you guys, so hope you guys enjoy.
Fast forward to 1492, when Christopher Columbus first caught sight of the New World.
They were seeking fabled promised lands of plenty where everything would just, you know, run free, and there would be this abundant wealth just waiting.
And hold on a second, let me know in the comments, like, I'm pretty sure Christopher Columbus wasn't the first person explorer to discover the New World. I'm pretty sure, like, there was like history of like Vikings, literally Vikings that discovered it before him. And but obviously there's Native Americans that were already there. But let me know in the comments if you guys think Christopher Columbus was the first one, because that's what everyone was taught until recent discoveries.
Waiting for them.
As Europeans mastered the oceans, others sailed in Columbus's wake.
For generations, you have people crossing the Atlantic from Europe who are dreaming of America and the life it might give.
And the thing is, Christopher Columbus never discovered America. He never once landed on today's, you know, US soil. I'm pretty sure he went to like Cuba or something like that. Let me know in the comments. I know for a fact he never went to the USA, like today, the USA.
Spanish were the first to establish a permanent settlement in what we now know as Florida. The French soon followed, but the British were in hot pursuit.
The first English men settled in what they saw as the New World in North America in 1607, some who saw themselves as adventurers. They settled the colony of Jamestown in present-day Virginia. Given that they were men of leisure generally, they didn't have the skills or the knowledge to make a colony survive. In about a decade,
and that makes sense, because think about it. The people that were able to sail like that and travel, them boys got money, you know what I mean? Or funded by their governments. Like, these people, you know, they didn't have the tools, resources, and they didn't have the common man that can, you know, build houses, you know, buildings, all that stuff.
80% had perished. And just at the point when it was looking like Britain's first North American settlement was going to fail, they find that they can grow tobacco. And all of a sudden, that colony begins to boom and grow.
This first British colony opened a gateway to a new life.
The first settlers had this sort of image of themselves as people who were fleeing the old world, and they were building this shining city on a hill that was going to be a beacon to the rest of humanity.
Everybody can live their dream. This is a land full of opportunities.
And that's such a shaping influence on the United States.
And let me know if it's true. I learned in school, I'm pretty sure, that most of the people that came from England or the British colonies, I'm pretty sure I was taught that most of them were like outcasts, you know, like religious people that didn't believe in the exact same things that, you know, the people that the British colonies believed in. So let me know in the comments if that's true or not. I'm pretty sure they're mainly like outcasts and like just searching for a new life because, you know, it was rough for them.
The first African slaves came into the Jamestown colony in 1619.
That first ship carried around 20.
Colony in 1619.
That first ship carried around 20 slaves.
And therein really begins the history of slavery in America.
George Washington was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson, third president, was a slave owner. The phrase from the Constitution is, all men are created equal. And it's there that we see the first inherent contradiction.
Women are excluded. The indigenous population is excluded. Enslaved Africans are also excluded.
See, this is why people say today, I believe it 100%. Like, let me know what your guys' thoughts in the comments. But, you know, in America, systematic racism is a thing, bro. And people will be like, nah, it's not, like, blah, 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 blah. Systematic racism is a thing, and it was started with them right there. Our founders, our founding fathers, the people we praise and worship, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, like they said, you know, the people on our money currency, like they own slaves. And they were the ones that came up with the Constitution about, you know, all men are created equal, blah, 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 except for the indigenous people that were here before them, and except for people of color. So, crazy.
A refusal to recognize the essential humanity of black people runs right the way through American history.
The America we know today, one of the richest, most powerful democracies in the world, was built on the backs of slaves.
Facts.
If you want to become a world power, you can't go too far wrong by integrating a program of almost limitless free labor.
In the 17th and 18th centuries, African slaves mainly worked on the tobacco plantations in the South. But by the early 19th century, this had given way to cotton plantations, as huge demand for cotton grew in America and Europe.
They're trading by the mid-19th century in the millions of bales every year.
And to actually meet that global demand, there is an increased demand for slave labor.
Yeah, so if you guys don't know, cotton, it was like, you know, that's when, you know, they discovered how to make clothes made out of cotton like that, you know what I mean? So the demand for it went super high up. So obviously they wanted to bring in a lot of slaves. And like, it's so, even to this day, man, people are so racist. Like, you know, if they get mad at black people, sometimes, you know, not all of them, especially not the ones that could defend themselves, but they'll tell black people, like, you know, you can call them like cotton pickers, they'll, you know, stuff like that, bro. It's crazy, man. And I promise you, racism is still alive and strong inside the South, like the deep South.
It's an economic system as well. It's actually going to, in many ways, drive the destiny of the country.
The property value of slaves increases too.
Those who are seen as healthy and fit are considered prized possessions.
A slave economy is what enables America to really begin to build the extraordinary wealth that it still benefits from today.
By 1860, America's slave population had reached nearly 4 million, resulting in an incredible explosion of the country's financial power.
4 million people in this time period. I guarantee you that was more than like 20% of the population. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like somewhere crazy high number. and they didn't see none of the wealth that anyone was making. Like, bro, it's so messed up. Like, look, they got children right here. Look at this kid. They got children out there, a little boy and a little girl. And what they haven't said yet, which I'm sure they'll get to, a lot of these slaves, you know, were married, had families, had a girl, you know what I mean? And as soon as they got to the ports and sold, they were separated most of the time. And it's just so sad, man. And I'm sorry, this is going to be one of those videos where I pause it a lot and talk because, you know, this is, you know what I mean? This is it feels personal to me, even though I was not alive in that time. I'm not, you know, saying like, you know, I know what they're going through. I don't know what they're going through like that, but it just hurts. You know what I'm saying? Like, it really hurts. Because one of these people in these pictures could be my ancestor. You know what I mean? Crazy.
The collective wealth held in America's 4 million African American slaves was roughly $3 billion, which was more than the combined value of all the railroads and the factories in the country combined.
3 billion.
Slavery was deeply...
3 billion in the early 1800s. That could fund countries today easily.
Entrenched in the South. But in the North,
third world countries.
Story.
The North becomes increasingly mechanized. We see the emergence of a factory system. You have an increasingly industrialized North. There's less need for as many physical hands.
The North do see a slave-based economy as part of the past. It's not where America is moving.
By 1860, tensions over slavery had reached a fever pitch. And things escalated further when Abraham Lincoln was elected president.
Lincoln was morally opposed to slavery. The white South fear that he will use his power to bring about the emancipation of the slaves and the destruction of their entire way of life. This is the point of no return.
So a few of you guys told me, you know, about the British crusade on slavery. Some of you guys thought that Abraham Lincoln owned slaves. Abraham Lincoln has never owned slaves, and he's always been verbally opposed to it. The presidents that have, like they mentioned earlier, was Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and probably like a couple others. But yeah, so Abraham Lincoln never owned slaves. And if anyone tells you the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery, they're lying to you, and they're probably a closet racist, because I guarantee you, the only people that say the Civil War is not fought over racism was the Confederate, like the Southern people, Confederate people. Like, that's 100% why the North went to war with them.
Convinced that the government would do all in its power to abolish slavery and sever the institution that drove their booming economy, 11 southern states broke away from the North.
Together, they form a new country, the Confederate States of America.
It has its own currency, its own government.
And they make a new flag, a Confederate flag. For the United States, these individuals are traitors. They have torn the Union apart. Even
today, we call them traitors. Like, that flag is like banned in many, many states. Like, sorry. Like, not necessarily banned, but like, if people see that, they're like, bro, you're an a-hole, bro. Like, what you doing?
The Civil War had begun. It would embroil...
Whenever I think of slavery, personally, I think of the Confederate flag. That's the first image that pops in my head, is the Confederate flag.
America in a deadly battle, bringing into doubt its very survival.
The question of slavery will now be settled in what became the nation's bloodiest war.
There is no doubt that slavery was the fundamental cause of the war, but the abolition of slavery was not Lincoln's priority. That was preservation of the Union.
The nation, in world historical terms, isn't even a toddler yet, right? And so the idea that it could, in fact, be riven by this ideological debate is what Lincoln and many others are desperate to avoid.
Britain and France were ready to recognize the Southern Confederate States as a separate nation. Lincoln had to act.
In January 1863, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation.
This legislation declared that all slaves in active rebellion against the Union shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free.
He's saying, those individuals who are now free, you can come and join the Union and you can fight for us. This proclamation was a wartime measure. It's a war tactic.
Nearly 200,000 African Americans would answer the call to fight against the South.
200,000. That is a lot of people in, the 1860s. You know what I mean? Like, I promise to God, life on the Bible, I would have been, I 100% would have volunteered just like they did.
Enslaved African Americans will now fight for their own freedom.
The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history.
It was brutal. It was horrific.
After 4 years of savage conflict, the Civil War finally ended in 1865. The Union had been saved, and in a landmark moment, the government passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery.
The 13th Amendment is the teeth to the Emancipation Proclamation.
The abolition of slavery is monumental.
They were no longer bound by the condition of their mothers to a life of enslavement in perpetuity.
Finally, those famous words that all men are created equal may finally actually be fulfilled.
The 13th Amendment ensured that African Americans would be forever free. But what it didn't answer was this set of thorny questions about what that freedom would actually look like.
We now have 4 million more free individuals in the United States. So what are we going to do? How do we rebuild?
In 1896, America tried to answer that question. But their answer would lead to yet more division, inequality, and bloodshed.
After the Civil War, the United States enters into a period of about 10, 12 years called the period of Reconstruction.
So Reconstruction is a partially successful experiment in securing newfound rights to former slaves, but it comes to an end prematurely because of white Southerners' determination to restore their dominion over the South.
The South lost the war, but the ideology of white supremacy was not dislodged.
100%. They're about to get into the KKK, the most racist, notorious group in probably the world. They literally idolize, to this day, they idolize Adolf Hitler's ideals and what he did to the Jews. Like, they idolize that. Except for instead of Jews, they think that they call themselves the Aryan Brotherhood too. Instead of Jews, though, they people of color, like specifically black people. Like, they believe that we shouldn't exist, basically.
So they fight to make sure that the South remains under the rule of white supremacy.
Okay, we're all equal, but the races do need to remain separate. So the doctrine was known as separate, but equal.
Jim Crow laws.
They needed that racial hierarchy. They needed that to be written into the law.
And I know you guys know the Jim Crow laws. I'm not even going to get into that.
A landmark case made racial segregation the law of the land for the whole of the United States.
The Supreme Court say if services are offered equally, it doesn't matter if they're racially segregated. And so you actually see a mushrooming of laws across the North and the South that begins to separate and partition the United States.
So just like right there, that sign, waiting room only for whites, right? And there's tons of, examples of this, like the bathrooms. Black people can go in the same bathroom as white people. Black people can't drink from the same water fountain as white people. Black people couldn't go to the same schools as white people. Black people couldn't go in the same movie theater as white people. You know what I mean? So it's like all this nonsense going on, like just it was absolute chaos, bro. And they made it so hard for Black people. Like it's terrible. And there's a reason why look up the statistics. I don't know the exact numbers, so I'm not gonna say them, but Black people in American prisons make up predominantly the vast majority of prisoners compared to the population. Like it's crazy.
One world for white individuals, another world for Black individuals. And it covers everything that you can think of. Interracial marriage is banned. You cannot work together. You cannot eat together.
We would have a Black school and a white school, and we'd have one carriage in a railway car and 9 were white people.
And let me make a point real quick. I'm sorry for keep pausing it, but the facilities that Black people had compared to white people were dog crap compared to the white people's. White people look good, like their bathrooms look great, blah blah blah, all that look great. The water fountains look great, and then the colored people, oh, they were awful, not taking care of nothing.
Could sit. What I'm getting at here is that it was never equal, and so racial inequality finds new life.
Segregation to the average Negro means being held back. He wants to move forward in the American mainstream. Segregation holds him back.
America was now brutally divided along racial lines.
Racial segregation was humiliating and degrading. You were not one of those individuals who lived in the land of the free.
All of this would have an enormous psychological effect on the African-American population, partly because if you fell foul of particular laws, the consequences would be dire.
Intimidation and violence were used to prevent African Americans going about their everyday lives, and even from exercising their constitutional right to vote.
You could be beaten. Your house could be burned down. You could be lynched.
These are sadistic forms of violence. It's not just the physical oppression, it's the psychological oppression. That the threat of the violence was this long shadow cast over African Americans that conditioned their every move in public.
In the fact that, I'm telling you right now, the African Americans, even today, like even back in the day, physically, oh, we beat somebody's, you know what I mean? We whooped somebody up, but they were so conditioned and oppressed, that they felt helpless, defenseless, and we weren't allowed to own guns. We weren't allowed to do all that. The white people were, and they for sure pointed guns at people. They for sure killed Black people. They for sure hung Black people. Like, it's crazy, man. And we're about to get into these little bastards right here, bro. Look at these clowns. Look at these clowns right here wearing the pointy hoods. And the crazy thing is, even in today's society, these KKK members right here, these guys, there are lawyers, judges, police officers, people of the law, people of the, you know what I mean? They're supposed to be men of the people. A lot of them are in high officials positions like that, especially in this time.
The most ruthless and notorious organization that rose up during this period was the Ku Klux Klan, who unleashed a reign of terror on the Black communities.
The Ku Klux Klan is a terrorist organization.
The mission of the Klan was the preservation of white people at the top of a racial hierarchy.
I told the mayor here if he refused to negotiate the racial issue with the members of the Klan, that we would start an economic economic boycott against this city.
The Klan actually reaches its greatest power in the 1920s when it has several million followers. It's so powerful that its members are able to march publicly on the streets of Washington, D.C. in front of the nation's capital.
With white supremacist organizations.
And keep in mind, people, these are our grandparents. These are people in their 60s right now. Or not in their 60s. These are their parents. You know what I'm saying? Their parents were involved in this. 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds were involved in this. They're probably smiling in some of the pictures that black people are getting hung in. Like there's, I don't know if you guys know the case of Emmett Till. He was a 13-year-old boy, 14-year-old boy that, it might have been 12 actually. Anyways, he got accused of whistling at a white woman in the 50s, and he got beat to death and thrown in a river. And his face was unrecognizable. It was just distorted and 3 times bigger than a normal head. And guess what? Like 2 years ago, the lady that accused him of doing it lied. She admitted to lying. But she's like 90 now, 80, 90 now. And this boy got sentenced to death. Bro, this is the type of stuff that makes black people just so angry with America. And this is why right here. This is some of the stuff right here. Why I, always reference to American slavery, American racism when I do the UK videos or whatever other video I do. So I hope you guys understand.
Like the KKK and racial segregation enforced throughout the country, equality seemed impossible.
World War II is yet another turning point in this story of African American freedom.
During the war, 125,000 African American soldiers were sent abroad to fight. And what
shout out to my grandpa Zebedee. He was an all-black battalion in Germany.
They encountered while serving sparked a revolution.
The experience of being stationed overseas is a moment of enlightenment for many African American soldiers. Be they stationed in Britain or France or Italy, they experienced greater interaction between the races. They fought a war to liberate Europe, and yet they were returning home to a country that didn't bestow the same kind of rights and privileges to people of color.
And like I told you guys in my other video, my grandpa came back from the war. When he went to the ports, him and his battalion, they were getting spit upon. White people were spitting on him, calling him the hard R's and telling him to go back to Africa, all that good stuff. Like it's crazy. And we were fighting for that.
Many veterans, when they return home, seek to push for racial change and reform.
They initiate the Double V campaign. We will fight fascism abroad, and we will also fight racism at home. Really the precursor to what we'll see in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s.
An event on the 5th of December, 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, would become the critical moment in this burgeoning movement.
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks decided on that day in December that she would not give up her seat on the bus, as was required by racial segregation laws.
She was arrested and taken to jail, and the outcry in the Black community that such a well-known and dignified woman had been jailed sparked the Montgomery bus boycott.
For over a year, African Americans refused to use the buses in Montgomery, and they actually bankrupt the company, forcing them to come to the table to negotiate and to finally end practices of racial segregation on the buses.
Rosa Parks became known as the mother of the civil rights movement, and the Montgomery bus boycott would also place young pastor Martin Luther King at the front and center.
Martin Luther King is the icon of the civil rights movement.
He had a way to connect with the nation, to tell the nation that you are not living up to what you defined yourselves to be.
We will no longer sell our birthright of freedom for the mess of segregated pottage.
The reason that he's so iconic is because of his philosophy of nonviolence. It's an extraordinary radical move to say, we're going to fight this injustice without violence. So that contrast becomes very, very powerful.
Unlike the Civil War just a century earlier, peaceful protest would form the bedrock of the entire movement, which exploded in 1960.
Students bring a vigor and an intensity that hasn't quite been witnessed before.
The student sit-ins are simply an attempt to secure integrated seating at lunch counters across the South.
They begin to occupy spaces where they are told you are not allowed to be. And they say, we're here and we're gonna stay.
People would pour drinks over their heads. They were being told to sit quietly, to not retaliate, to do nothing.
They are engaging in acts of non-violent civil disobedience. These students are actually breaking the law.
On February 27th, 80 Nashville students were...
Yeah, and that was breaking the law in that time. Black people eating inside a white restaurant. And, you know, black people refusing to listen to white people. Black people retaliating if a white man was there, making fun of him, calling him the hard R, pouring drinks on his head, throwing food at him. We're just supposed to sit there and accept it, right? Like, nah, that's so messed up. And I don't know if they're going to get into this, but the government, the U.S. government actually admitted to the assassination of Martin Luther King. The government killed Martin Luther King. Shit's effed.
Arrested out of over 300.
This is a new radical phase of protest that willing to peacefully defy laws that they can withstand the worst that the white power structure can throw at them. It's that sharper edged protest that will bring about the civil rights revolution of the 1960s.
By the late summer of 1963, more than 200,000 people marched on Washington.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please.
They gathered by the Lincoln Memorial, the very place where just 4 decades ago, the KKK had been allowed to protest. Their aim? To push through civil rights legislation and establish job equality for all.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
It's at that protest in Washington that King, standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, delivers his most famous speech, you know, the I Have a Dream oration.
But that speech is far more than a dream. It's actually a critique of the United States. He's actually addressing the nation on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. Are African Americans free 100 years later after Abraham Lincoln first said, yes, you are free?
We were not.
Martin Luther King says no. The nation has not lived up to that promise. Martin Luther King really understood the potential of the United States, and he pushed the United States to live up to what the founding fathers saw for the nation.
The following year, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, ending nearly a century of racial segregation. And the Voting Act, guaranteeing African Americans the right to exercise their vote, was passed 12 months later. It had taken over 3 centuries since the arrival of the first slaves in Jamestown to finally address the deep-seated...
Yeah, man, I really hope that you guys see why I get so emotional over this, for real. And man, it wasn't until, you know, the late 1960s, you know, black people were still getting hung. After this, black people were still getting hung, pictures taken of them with 100 white people taking pictures in the camera, smiling. And those are our grandparents today, alive. And, you know, that's how close it was to this century. Like 30 years later, it's hit 2000. Like, it's crazy. So man, but if you guys like this content though, please smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the noties, leave a message in the comment if your guys' thoughts and feelings on, you know, the civil rights and all that in America. And let me know what else you guys want me to react to, man. And I'll catch you guys on the next video. If you guys want to support the channel, the links right here, and the links in the bio. Peace.